Hi everybody. Well, Rita, this is great, isn't it? Sitting here in the quiet of this beautiful Chinese elm. Yes, somebody wants to know about my parents. My father's name was John and my mother's name was Elizabeth. She came from the Wise family, and that added some important genes to us, I guess. And my father, he was a good salesperson, but he eventually became a minister and a missionary to South America. Mother was a great homemaker. There were 4 of us children, 3 boys and 1 girl. Wallace was the oldest, then Urban, then myself, Elmer, and my sister Ivanette. And Wallace has passed on, and so has Urban. But the 2 of us that are left, we're still enjoying life. Well, let's see. What do you want to know about the?
Can you remember
my parents?
Yeah. Can you remember your earliest childhood memory? What that would be? Or
Oh yes, my early childhood memories. I grew up in Peru for 7 years. Actually, I was born in Bakersfield near Shafter. Actually, it was Shafter near Bakersfield, California, while they were on furlough. And then we went back down to Peru for 7 years. We came back in 1929 and settled in the little town of La Sierra, just out of Riverside, California. And my early life was very interesting. We had some good friends. One of my best friends was Joe Nixon. He eventually married one of my cousins, Glendon, and we would roam the hills and hike them. We were great hikers, enjoyed the outdoors. But finally, the war came on, and we were busy with schooling. We didn't have any vacation time. We spent all the time in school, so I took 4 years of high school in 3 years and 4 years of college in 3 years. So we didn't get to really enjoy some of the things that some people enjoy when they have summer vacation. But it was fine, and I went to college at La Sierra University and graduated from there, and then went to medical school in Loma Linda. And now let's see, honey, you want to tell something about our meeting, or why don't you tell about your background?
Well, let's see. My father was George Burt Boswell, and he met my mother. My dad was a school teacher, public school teacher, and she was one of the students. In those days, they went to school, you know. In grade school, they were still, I think they were still, that he taught grade school, and I think she was in the 6th grade or something. Anyway, they married young. That is, she was young, he was older. And I had 5 brothers and sisters. 1 brother and 4 sisters, I should say. And my mother's name was Stanley Maloney, before that was her maiden name. Let's see. And I was born in Jefferson, Texas. So I'm a Texan. But I grew up mostly in Oklahoma, different areas. But around Stillwell, the Maloneys came from, they lived around the area of of Muskogee in Oklahoma. And my father was born in Missouri, and his folks moved to Hobart, Oklahoma. I don't know when, but sometime during his growing up years. And I think I spent most of my school years in a little red schoolhouse. It was painted red too. And that's where we went to school. Had to walk about 2.5 miles to get to school every day, which was a little difficult when it snowed, which it didn't do very often. We didn't have much snow in that part of Oklahoma. A lot of rain in the early spring and the winter. I don't know what else should I say.
How about a favorite childhood memory with your parents or your do you have siblings? Did you mention that?
Well, we used to have to carry water. We had a spring down a ways from our place. Had to go down there and carry water back to the house. And I remember in the summertime particularly, when the sun was shining so hot, we would go from shade to shade. We'd rush through the sunny part, get to the shade, and then we would walk very slowly through the shade.
You were barefooted.
Yeah, barefooted,
Oh,
and it got pretty hot. So, but my dad was a great one for wanting a fresh drink of water. So when he'd come in from working we had a little farm. When he'd come in from working out in the sun, he'd want, "Can you get me a fresh drink of water?" So we'd go to the spring, come back with the water. It was pretty cold if we rushed. Yeah.
okay. How about where were you when you met? Do you remember?
Pardon me?
Where were you living when you met each other?
Oh, my sister and her husband decided to move to California, and they took me along. And I met some friends that had lived in Oklahoma and had moved to La Sierra earlier. And one of those friends introduced me to Elmer. And we didn't really like each other very much when we met. Nothing clicked. But after we met a few times.
Well, I should say that the friend that introduced her,
Hazel.
she liked me pretty well. Her name was Hazel.
But you didn't like her.
I wasn't particularly interested in her. So she figured, well, if I can't work something out this way, I'll have maybe my friend get acquainted with him.
So she was the matchmaker.
Yeah, so she was a matchmaker. And so she got us together, and I think the first time we met was at a social in a community
Church, let's say.
church that had a nice fellowship hall, and we had one of those so-called vegetarian
Dances.
marches.
Dances.
And that's where we met, I think, on a Saturday night. That must have been in 1941, maybe?
1938, 39.
Yeah, it was probably around 41, somewhere there. We married in 43.
Where were you married?
We married at La Sierra University in one of their
Chapel.
chapels there.
Were your parents in attendance?
Yes, and as a matter of fact, my father being a minister, he married us.
Aha.
And my best man was, of course, Joe, whom I was a good friend for many years, Joe Nixon. And the best lady was,
A good friend of mine.
yeah, what was her name? Marjorie?
Bertha May.
Bertha May.
Bertha May Warner.
Warner. Okay.
And let's see. Was that an interesting thing that I was sewed into my wedding dress?
Sure.
Yeah.
Couldn't get zippers. It was during the war, you know. They just didn't make zippers in those days. Hardly. You could hardly ever find a zipper. So I was sewn into my wedding dress by your cousin Martha.
She was quite a
She
seamstress.
did the sewing. And then when I wanted to take it off, they had to rip it out again. Kind of a different way of doing. But at least we didn't have to put buttons or anything. We could, by sewing it, the plaque together, she just kind of tacked the plaque together. She didn't really sew it. But we always laughed about that. I was sewn into the wedding dress.
What about a date prior to your wedding? Can you remember any dates that you had that were memorable?
Oh, we had many dates. You know, this was during the war, so our dates were, it was very difficult to get gasoline. There was rationing.
Couldn't go very far.
We couldn't go very far, but they always had these old-fashioned fountains. And so we didn't have much money either, so we would buy a milkshake and always ask for 2 straws, and we both used the same milkshake. And that's the way a lot of our dates were, that we didn't travel or go very far. We were rather restricted by the war effort. But we had enjoyable times, and we still do. So we carried that on, that tradition.
Okay, how about your children? Why don't we go through a list of
Sure.
where they were born and
Right.
maybe a good story of each of them?
We married in 43, is that right, honey?
Uh-huh. And Lester was born in 44
Okay.
at Loma Linda. You were still in school there.
I was in medical school at that time, first year. And then several months later, Carol was born.
Yeah, 15 months, 16
15 months.
18 months.
By then we were living in Los Angeles because the school had 2 campuses, and the last 2 years of medical school were in Los Angeles, and I did my externships and so forth in medicine at the LA County Hospital. And as a matter of fact, Carol had a rather interesting delivery because the doctor didn't get there in time, and a resident and myself delivered her. So Carol was actually delivered by my friend and myself. I may have tied the umbilical cord for all I know. Okay, then we had a hiatus for about, what, 10.5 years? And then the last 3 of our children appeared on the scene of action.
Adele was Carol and then Adele, and then John and George.
Yes. George being the youngest. And they were born in, Adele was born in California.
Down at San Diego.
San Diego. The other children were born in Maryland.
John and George were at Tacoma Park, born in Tacoma Park Hospital, Washington.
Then after we settled on our practice, or where I was going to practice medicine, which happened to be Tacoma Park, Maryland, just a suburb of Washington, D.C., at a hospital there. We probably lived there, what, some 17 years? Something like that. And then I got a call from Loma Linda University to join their staff out here in the ear, nose, and throat department. But just prior to that, I had finished my residencies at the White Memorial Hospital in California, LA, and I took also a year of advanced postgraduate work at the University of Pennsylvania, which was a very memorable year. They taught me a lot of things, and then we settled in practice in Tacoma Park. After we came to California to join the university here, we decided we would just stay here, and so this is where we presently live. And we found a little place out from Loma Linda in the hills, an area called Ritchie Canyon, and we purchased that place in 1963, and we still live on the old compound, and I think the children all have pleasant memories. I hope they're all pleasant of the years we spent there.
Okay, well, I have compiled a list of questions that some of the kids wanted to have some answers to, and if they're unpleasant, I'll let them come out and ask. I had one though. I've heard that George and John have a reputation for being a little mischievous, and just to set the record straight on a couple of things, how about some mischievous stories about Carol and Lester first, and then Adele, and then we'll move on to a good John and George story after that. But why don't we start with the older kids who are supposed to be the more upstanding citizens of the group?
Well, what I remember about Lester is he liked crayons very much. Was always writing and drawing on paper with the crayons. And he had a little, his nose, I guess, was kind of itching or something. Stuck a black crayon up his nose, and then his nose started dripping this black stuff, you know, and what in the world, you know? And of course Daddy wasn't home, and I said, I don't know what's the matter with this guy. And he kept saying, my nose, Mama, nose. And he was about 2 or 3 years old. And finally, he sneezed a big sneeze, and there went the crayon out on the floor. Anyway, that was the whole thing.
Okay, how about Carol? What's a good Carol story that I can use against her later?
Well, let's see.
Well, I remember
You tell about Carol.
we used to make trips out to California about once a year from Maryland to see my parents, and Areta's parents were living in Oklahoma, so we would see them on the way. And I remember that when we got to the desert once, there was a beautiful desert poppy blooming, and I didn't realize they had some stickers on it, and I picked one of those poppy flowers and told Carol to hold it, and I would take a picture. I couldn't figure out for a long time why she was crying, and finally I said, hold still and let's get this picture over with. She kept crying, and I didn't want to take a picture of her crying, so finally she said, these stickers. And so I realized then that it must have been the prickly poppy. And sure enough, they were
Pretty good. good
hurting
form.
her hands
Pretty good
while she
form.
was holding them. But she was very patient. She was going ahead and hold them and take the picture, even though she was crying.
We've got a picture with a tear in her eye,
Yeah.
or down her nose.
What about Adele? Do we have any closet stories about Adele?
Adele, let's see, what she was living in.
Adele was always very independent. She didn't want anyone to help her. Remember when Thelma and I took that trip that time we were in Maryland and we came to California to visit, and my sister Thelma and I drove the children. We stopped in Sedona, and they had this old mission, and my sister that we were visiting there thought that would be a good place to visit, so we went. But they had an awful lot of steps, and I said to Adele, I said, let me hold your hand so you can climb them. Oh, I can do it myself, she said, and pulled away from me and fell down the steps.
Oh.
Cut her chin, had to take I don't remember how many stitches, 3 or 4 stitches, I guess. But she cut that chin so many times when she was a little girl because she was so independent. She didn't want any help.
Which is a good trait.
Well, I guess.
How about the good juicy stories on John and George? Do we have any good?
Oh, they were
favorites?
mischievous boys, yes.
They used to oil their trucks.
But it was good mischief. Good mischief.
They used to oil their trucks with my spray bottle of hand lotion or body lotion. Kind of squirted it all over, everywhere, all over the. But they were oiling their trucks.
When John was in early academy, I was driving around Loma Linda and came around ready to make a corner, and I saw this kid on some kind of a roller board,
Skateboard.
and they were towing him from a car, and he was being towed and just having a great time.
Holding onto a rope.
All of a sudden they made that turn, and
That's
when
so-
I made the turn too, I looked and I said, "That's John." And about that time he looked up and saw me, and oh, was he embarrassed. So
He was supposed to be at school,
he
you
was
understand.
supposed to be at school, yes.
Yeah, ironically, last night he told us that exact story, and,
Oh.
and what he didn't tell you at the time apparently was that they had borrowed one of the mom's cars and were out
I
joyriding
see.
in the rain.
Well, there was quite a few things we didn't know.
And
the car
apparently,
had quit.
apparently the car sustained some damage, and so they had to take it back, and so they had to walk back to school, and they couldn't figure a way to do it. So, and he said that he glanced back and he said, "What's that car doing so close to us?" And then he noticed it was Mom and Dad, and so he took off and left one of the boys there. But it's funny that you mentioned that story. Okay, let's see. Do we have
George, he was pretty young when we had our car parked on a little incline in Grand Terrace.
2 years old.
That's just before we moved up the canyon here. And some way or other, he took the thing out of gear. We must not have had the brake on, and the car rolled back with George screaming in it, and rolled into the neighbor's yard
Which was a down.
down below us. Fortunately, it wasn't too long an incline, and no one was hurt or injured, but he got quite a
He
scare out
was
of
sure
that.
scared.
As you see, we can't remember any bad things with the children. They were all pretty good. And I guess that's the way it should be.
We forget the bad things.
Yeah.
Okay, well, the kids put together a list of questions, and some of them you've answered, so I'll skip those. But one of the questions was, how long was your courtship?
2 years.
2 years.
2 years?
2 years.
Do you remember how and where you proposed?
Yeah. We were sitting out in front of my sister's house, home, in your car, in your folks' car.
Yes, I didn't have a car.
And didn't take very long to think about it.
Okay. Apparently it was pretty short. To the point.
That's right. Did you get a parental approval, or did they approve? Were there any?
Well, the Lorenz, your mom and dad, were a little bit, they thought you were too young. They wanted you to finish medical school first. But we didn't think we needed to wait that long.
I suppose we inherited genes that, made us very, at least on the Lorenz side, rather headstrong. When we made up our minds to do something, we didn't change very often.
All right.
And my parents were in Oklahoma, so they didn't know a great deal about our courtship.
You've mentioned some of these facts before, but what was it like meeting and conducting a courtship while the world was at war?
Very interesting.
Uh-huh.
Yes.
We walked a lot.
A lot of walking.
Uh-huh.
Fortunately, we were members of a church, the Seventh-day Adventist Church, and my oldest brother took a great interest in young people, Wallace. Very interested in young people and their welfare. He was always so good to them. He'd help them through school, he'd do this and that. He made sure that the young people in those days had a place to go for recreation, because there just wasn't, we couldn't travel much. We were pretty much located at home. So we'd have these Saturday night get-togethers, we'd have feeds and so forth, and a lot of that was due to my brother Wallace's foresight, and we appreciated that very much.
Make tomato and peanut butter sandwiches.
Yes. So that made much of our life, very pleasant. Being in school, almost constantly, we needed some kind of an outlet. We didn't have vacation time, so we were really hard pressed for. I always figured that we lost some of our opportunities that children had before us and since the war of vacation times during the summer, but we didn't have any of that.
Okay. How did the Depression affect you in positive and negative ways, I guess?
The Depression?
The Depression era, yes.
I grew up during the Depression, out on this little farm, and one thing I remember, and it might be interesting, my mother needed salt for her to bake bread, and we had we were out on the farm, and we had a grocery truck. They used to come out with necessary things in the truck. It was kind of like a miniature grocery store. And my mother said, I need salt, so you go down and wait for the truck to come along the road. And she gave me a dozen eggs, and she said, you can trade the eggs for salt. And it took a whole dozen eggs for less than a pound of salt. I thought that was pretty interesting. Now eggs are a lot more expensive than that. But that was it. 6 cents is what the eggs brought. 6 cents a dozen. And I got the salt, and she made the bread.
Well, we had come back in 1929, which was in the midst of the Depression from South America. And my dad purchased 10 acres in La Sierra, just out of Riverside. And it was a bare 10 acres. So Irvin and Wallace, being older boys in their teens, they made adobe bricks, baked them in the sun, and they built their house out of adobe. It was a 3-room house, a couple bedrooms and 1 common room, which was kitchen and living room all together. And that's where we lived for quite a while. They also built 2 other buildings, one to house a broom shop. My Uncle Fred came down and got us started in the broom business. And so we had a broom shop there, and the other adobe buildings were for chicken coops. And so we raised chickens as well and sold the eggs. Yes, I'm often amazed how Mother was able to keep food on the table. We didn't buy knickknacks, but they bought the staples in those days, and our parents cooked. People don't cook much anymore, I guess. And she made wonderful bread, and we always had a little garden, so we were able to survive that way. And we made it fine. As far as toys, being kids, we made our own toys. We'd use, and I think we appreciated it more. We'd either use rings from barrels and guide them along the roads, or tires or whatever, and we had a lot of fun with those. I remember a neighbor of ours, we had a hill in La Sierra, which was quite steep, and our neighbor had a old hay rack that they took the tongs off and just had the axle and the wheels, and they took it up in the top of the mountain there, or the hill, and then they held on from the bottom of the axle and came down the hill, and we thought they were all killed, but no, they survived. So we had lots of fun in those days, and I think we enjoyed our early life just as much as kids now with all their toys. We enjoyed our toys because we made a lot of them, and we appreciated them.
What about you? Do you have any interesting toys or sewing that you did as a child to kind of get by without being able to go to Toys R Us?
We used to make pictures during quiet time after lunch. That was our dinner time at noon. And after, Papa would always rest a while, and he would rest his eyes, you know, and take a little nap. And we would make, my sisters and I, we would make pictures. We would take an old sheet and get the right size for the picture, and then use crayons and make a picture, draw a picture. I was never very good at drawing the pictures, but my sisters that did better. They could make lovely looking pictures with the crayons on the white sheet.
Okay, let's see. What are your some of your more humorous or memorable parenting experiences that you went through with all the kids?
Well, I think one of the things that the children may remember, and we remember too, as I mentioned prior, we quite often made a trip once a year to California, and we had an older car. There was no air conditioning, and when we would hit the desert, the 4 kids, their faces would be brilliant red, sweat coming down, and I don't know how they survived, but yes, they'd get a little cranky. I guess I would too if I were them. But it was a long trip for them, but they put up with it. And I do think they enjoyed it, because once they arrived, there were so many wonderful things that was awaiting them. Our parents and their uncles out here and aunts, they would arrange to go down to Knott's Berry Farm, and Disneyland, I guess, was being built around there too. And then of course we'd go to the ocean. We'd have wonderful get-togethers and wonderful times, and I think the children probably remember those experiences.
When we would stop to see my parents in Oklahoma, we'd go to Rattlesnake Springs, remember?
Mm-hmm.
And there was the watercress growing near the spring. The children always enjoyed that in their salad. A little bit of a
They
tang
picked the
to it.
watercress.
Yeah, picked the watercress, and then when we got to
I don't think they'd eat it though.
well, in the salad they would.
I guess they did.
Just to eat it that way, it was a little bit strong.
What do you think is the way that you've made it 60 years together, and what advice would you give to someone who's just recently married in comparison to 60 years of being together? What do you contribute your longevity together?
You have the wisdom, honey. Go ahead.
Well, I would say that that we never thought of anything else but lifetime together from the time that we were married, which helps, I think. If you never think of anything else, then it's easier. And I think that that I would say that try to remember the other party in the marriage, and try to do things that would make them happy.
Yeah, well, you know, when the preacher asks for that commitment, you know, that you will stay together through illness, whatever comes along, and you say yes, you know, I think that nowadays that goes over so easy that people don't really think what they're saying, and they say the yes, but they look at it as a trial and error type of thing. I think once a commitment's made, that's something you live with. And yes, life is after marriage. It's not easy. It's, you know, you think it's a honeymoon all through life. It isn't. No, life has its problems, but it's a give and take type of thing. And you have to kind of put your feet in the other person's shoes a little bit, walk in their shoes. And I think if each one of us do that, you know, we get a little feel of how the other person feels and what they're going through. And so you have a sort of an empathy that you might not otherwise have. People are basically selfish. Babies are basically selfish. They cry for everything they want. And some people never grow up. They never mature. And maturity means more than just age. It's something that develops through life, life's experiences, life's trials, life's happy moments. All those things help us mature. And of course, in our case, we always felt that the third dimension, the physical, the mental, and the spiritual dimension are very important. And I think people miss a lot when they don't plan on that spiritual dimension. The church has always been a help, our belief in our God. And those things are all very important. And so we've kind of looked at it that way. We've never thought about anything like a divorce or anything like that. That never entered my mind anyway. I don't know about Areta's mind, but
I neither.
it was a commitment, and we are committed for life.
You've been very fortunate to see your children grow old and
Yes.
their children
Yeah.
grow to maturity and even get to see some great-grandchildren.
Yes.
What would you tell your great-great-grandchildren about yourselves and each other? So if you had to describe yourself to a generation that you may not get to see, how would you do that? What would you tell them? What would you want them to know about yourself, and what would you want them to know about each other?
That's a
That's difficult.
big, loaded question. I suppose the question that comes up is how soon do you tell them? Actually, you can start very early. You say, well, can you tell them all about your life and expect them to understand it? No, but you can express love to them. And I think that's probably the most important thing. A lot of children feel lonely. There isn't that love in families that there should be, and concern for each other. And so that can be expressed at a very early age. And when they get a little older, I think the thing that accounts the most is your, what's the word I want, your example. Children look for examples. They may not understand all the theoretical things you might want to tell them. They see example. They see in what you do, in what you say. And so example is the biggie, as I see it. And they'll learn from that if you're a good example. We aren't always good examples, but we've got to try. You have anything, hon?
I think you said pretty well. You said it pretty well, but I can't think of anything else that I could add.
We have wonderful children. I can say that, and all the grandchildren.
We do.
We're so fortunate, you don't see that in many families.
Well, so many families have such huge problems, which we didn't experience. And, how do we know how we would have reacted if we had had a great problem with any of our children? For instance, if their health, wasn't good, it would greatly affect your family.
What do you think you admire most about each other? What's something that keeps your bond very strong? Is there's something that you do on a daily basis, or some remembrance? In my relationship with my wife, there's always just some little sparkle that I see every day that kind of keeps me enamored of her and just surprised by how special she is to me. And I think that I'm sure that spending 60 years together, there's things that you couldn't live without, and then there's probably some things that make life real interesting. Is there some characteristic about each other that you guys find compelling or fun, or something that just means a lot to you?
I'll go first, hon.
I'll let you go first.
Well, Areta was the quiet type. She never said much, and I guess I admired that somewhat, because when she did say something, it usually was important. So I would listen. I may not have always done what she perhaps wanted done, but I always listened, because usually when she spoke it was important. She has a faith that is something that I think we all can emulate, and it's shown, I think, in bringing up the children. I've always admired my good wife when I look back, for one thing especially, and that is her devotion to family. I was gone so often. My work carried me, I'd get up in the middle of the nights to the emergency rooms and so forth. So much of my time was gone, and she really raised the family. And when I think what a wonderful job she did on that, you know, I'm amazed. I don't know how she did it. Not only did she raise this family, but because of our circumstances earlier in life, going through schooling, she had 3 or 4 foster children she took care of. And that was a job. And they weren't always the best kind of children that you got, you know. But she did it all herself sometimes, alone. Especially when I was in Pennsylvania attending the university. So I admire my wife for that tenaciousness, and that is just, I wonder how she did it.
I don't know. I can't think of anything special to say.
Okay, well, why don't we go on to, I have about 3 more questions. I know this is getting to get drawn out, but let's see. One easy question is, where did you spend your honeymoon, and what was it like?
Oh.
That's the question.
You want to?
You answer it.
You want to go ahead? I don't want to go on talking here. Well, my brother Irvin, when he got married, he believed, he was still in the era where you bought things in large quantities. He would buy flour in big sacks, and that's the way he started his household. And he said sauerkraut was very good too. He loved sauerkraut. He'd buy a lot of sauerkraut. Well, in our honeymoon, we didn't have any money, so we couldn't stay at a hotel. So we went for our honeymoon to the beach. And that's where we spent our honeymoon. And let's see, we had the car. I guess we slept on the beach, is that right?
We took your parents' car. We didn't have a car.
Well, it's my parents' car, yes. And I bring in the sauerkraut because I think we had a can of sauerkraut in the car. I think we ate that for breakfast.
We had a jar. Excuse me. We had a jar of sauerkraut and a package of cinnamon rolls.
That doesn't sound like a very good meal, but I'll tell you, we were very poor. I don't think I had a dime in my billfold. And when we got married, my billfold was the same, but my brother Wallace put a $20 bill in there, and I never did figure out where that came from until he finally told me what happened. so I had some good brothers that looked after us.
Okay, and this is the final list of questions.
Uh-oh.
We're going to talk about firsts, and in no particular order. I guess the first question is, what was it like with your first patient? And can you remember your first patient?
My first patient.
Well, that would be after you set
Well,
up
I
the
guess my
practice.
first patient was my daughter Carolyn, having delivered her. Well, I had first patients as I was an extern in medical school. I had first patients when I was an intern, and first patients when I was a resident. But first patient in practice, I guess, was in Washington, D.C., and I'm not sure who that was. I was just starting practice there, and I had just gotten the word around to the doctors in the community that I was there, and so they would send me patients. But I didn't get referrals right off. It was usually patients from the hospital there, that is, workers. They would come in, and I think the first patient I saw was someone that had a cold, as I remember. I'm not sure what the name was of the individual, but I think that was what I first took care of.
Okay, the next question is your first car, and I know you spoke a little bit about that, but can you remember?
Some car. We did, we had, as we mentioned before, gasoline was very hard to get.
It was an old Plymouth, wasn't it? Huh?
Yes, and we heard that someone had a used car for sale, which they weren't using. It was just sitting there, and we bought it. And I think, what was it, $50 a month that we paid for it on time. You were still in school at medical school, and but what was so funny about it was that we didn't drive it enough to keep the battery up. Every time we'd want to use it, we'd have to, I'd get in it and guide it, and he would have to push to start it. So that's the way it went.
You see, we were living in those days in Los Angeles.
No, in Loma Linda.
Oh, in Loma Linda, okay. And then we moved to Los Angeles. But what folks don't know nowadays who live out west here, Southern California had a wonderful system called the red cars. And we could go to any city we wanted to practically. I wish they had them now. We wouldn't have this gridlock, I don't think. But they did away with them and built freeways instead. Those red cars were great. You could go from Riverside here into LA, all over the place,
Small amount
Beach,
of money.
and with very little money. But they're gone, and a lot of history went with that. That car, incidentally, we used going on my internship in Colorado.
Denver.
In Denver. And we took a trailer behind it. Someone gave us a trailer with our goods. We had very few. But we got a flat on the way out in nowhere. And the only tools we had were a sort of a straight metal piece and something to take nuts off, and we changed our own tires with those. And I don't know where we got the inner tube from, whether I had an extra one or whether I had to go into town and hop a ride to get into town to get an inner tube and bring back. But anyway, we'd put the inner tube in and then put it back together and then pump it up with a hand pump. Yes, we worked in those days.
How about your first radio? Can you remember? Probably it was before you were married.
My first radio was a Crystal radio. A friend of mine told me how to make it, and we made a crystal radio. And I'd forgotten how many stations we could get, probably one or two. But the crystal radio was what we used.
How about your first television? Do you remember when you got it? And
You remember that one, Hud? The first television?
Pretty small, wasn't it?
Yes, and it had a, in order to make the picture look bigger, they had a magnifying glass in front. And we couldn't get a whole lot of things. There was wrestling. We would look at wrestling. There weren't too many programs in those days, but that was our first TV.
what you spoke a little bit about the wrestling programs. What radio programs? I know my grandparents used to listen to a lot of mysteries. And do you remember the shows when you were younger that they had on television and radio?
There was Fibber McGee and
Oh
Molly.
yeah, you loved that, huh?
That was a good one. They had all kinds of things that were funny, but the one that I liked the best, I think, was they had a closet, and they would always say, "Don't open that door." But of course, they'd say it too late. The door was always open. Everything fell out, and all this noise on the radio. Of course, you didn't see it, but all this noise on the radio, it was funny.
I was always interested in comedians. In fact, my sister always said I should have been an actor, I guess, or a comedian or something. And so we'd listen to Amos and Andy and other comedians. Those were the ones we probably listened to.
And Red
Most
Skeleton.
of the time, Red Skeleton. I always liked Red Skeleton. He was a real actor. We don't put out very good actors anymore. They don't really know how to really act, but they were real professionals.
All right, I have 2 more questions and about 5 more minutes of tape on this one. So
Okay.
we'll ask the first question, and I might have to switch tapes. Your first baby. What was it like to go from a couple that just had to depend on each other to having a third wheel around to take care of and to be responsible for?
That was difficult, especially since Elmer was away a great deal of the time. And especially when he got ill and we had to take him back to the hospital. He was just 3 weeks old then.
He developed a hernia, bilateral hernia. I think probably is from crying. You know, this is a thing that people learn when we were that age. You learn these things slowly. We didn't realize that probably the little kid was starving. And he was crying a lot, probably
Didn't
for
know it.
food. Didn't realize
At
it.
first about 6 months of the life.
All this
I think he would just never had enough to eat.
straining
I was
of
nursing him.
crying, I think, had some reason why he developed the hernia. But we got that fixed up. Those days, they just used a little belt with folded in. He didn't have surgery. I guess he's all right now. He's still around here somewhere.
Okay, and the last question, and we have about 3 minutes left, is your first kiss. Do you remember when you had your first kiss, and maybe where it was, if you do remember it?
First test.
First
Kiss.
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 Oh, kiss.
Yes. We're gonna get juicy now. Talking about
Yeah.
the first
Don't
kiss.
remember that, do you?
Or was
I
the first
don't.
one?
I don't know.
We kissed so much, I guess we don't remember the first one.
That's a hard one.
Yeah, I don't remember.
Long time ago.
Yes.
More than 60 years ago.
I guess it just came natural, never triggered our computer.
But I think at our wedding, everyone said anyway, that we kissed too long at the wedding. I said, that was too long. You remember them?
Nowadays it might be too short.
That's all that comes to my mind right now.
It's been a great 60 years. We've enjoyed every minute of it. Had ups and downs and flat places and high places, and it was. The question says, would you do it again? Yeah. Lord's been very good to us. And the kids, you know, you couldn't have better kids than we have. All the grandkids, great-grandkids. It's just wonderful. We hope they help to make the world a better place to live. God bless you all.